Okay, we're looking at the Edexcel IGCSE English Language and paper one. What I'm going to do is just go through some feedback based on a mock that my Year 11 have just done, but also try and bring in a few things that Edexcel themselves say in their examiner reports based on their exams over the last few years. Question one then is 2 quick, easy marks. You just need to pick out the words or phrases, no explanations needed. Just make sure you get them from the right line. So if it says lines 6 to 8, that's where you've got to get the points from. You won't get anything if you pick them from the wrong lines. You can give an extra example if you like. You won't lose any marks. The examiner can only give you marks here, but just get those two examples or points written down. What you can't do is just copy the whole of those 2 or 3 lines, because if you just lift it from the text completely in a big chunk like that, they won't know that you've actually selected the points to answer the question. Question 2, this will ask you for 4 clear points, so give them 5. Always give them 1 more than they're asking for to be safe. You need to write in full sentences, not bullet points, but do write clearly and separately. Okay, jot them down. What I would do is write my first point and then start the next point on the next line. Okay, so that you're really clearly making 4 or 5 separate points. There's no point in repeating something you've already said. You might think, oh, I'm filling up a whole page here, I'm bound to get the mark somewhere. Well, no, actually, unless you've made those 4 or 5 clear points, you won't get the marks. It's really important here that you write these in your own words. No quotations, please, for this question. The other thing that the examiner report says is don't spend too long on this question. Bear in mind that you can only gain 4 marks, so use your time wisely and allow time to plan and develop your responses to the questions with more marks. So questions 4 and 5, there's far more marks for them. You've got to make sure you're allowing enough time for them. Question 3, they'll ask for 5 clear points, so give them 6. Again, set out these points clearly and separately in full sentences. You can use brief supporting quotations here, but you need to make the points. So if you use overly long quotations, like a line or 2, that actually might stop you from showing your understanding if you're not careful. If you're just copying a whole sentence out, how is the examiner going to realise that you've actually understood the point that you're making? So what the examiner report says is the best answers used a good balance of short quotation and explanation. So yes, pick out a word or a phrase, but explain the point yourself. You won't get any marks for AO2 here, so don't waste your time analysing language or structure. Okay, it's picking out the points. It's a straightforward question again. You've just got to be thorough and pick out a little bit more than they ask for and you'll get full marks. Read the question carefully. Question 4, there's no excuse for this because you should have an essay answer prepared for each of the anthology texts. And then it's just a question of tweaking it and applying it a little bit to what they actually ask you for the question. Don't waffle. Okay, you will get no marks whatsoever for waffling. So if you write something like, the writer uses language and structure in many different ways in this passage to create tension, I will be analysing a range of techniques which the author uses effectively to have an impact on the reader. You will just make your examiner scream, and you are wasting your time. You are wasting your ink. There is absolutely no point whatsoever in writing that kind of rubbish. You haven't made a single point in those couple of sentences. Okay, don't waste your life. Okay, you need to get straight down to making specific points about structure and language, not warbling your way into an essay. Okay, get straight down to making a point. My advice would be to start with structure and then move into language so that you're kind of starting from the outside in. So you're starting by talking about how the text is structured as a whole and then zooming in to talk about specific examples of how the language is effective. You need to include some really close linguistic analysis here, so therefore you're going to need to use linguistic terminology. It helps you to be precise in what you're saying about language if you can talk about the writer's use of alliteration or onomatopoeia or an imperative or an adjective or an adverb or a minor sentence, syntactic parallelism. So using a kind of PEA or petal structure where you're making a point, backing it up with an example or a quote, mentioning the technique, analysing it, okay, and getting into the rhythm of that analytical writing. When you're writing about language, I would say there are three areas. The first is looking at words and phrases. So this particular adjective has these connotations. This adverb is effective because it makes me think of this. Perhaps the writer used this verb to suggest. Okay? Language techniques. Look at imagery, look at similes and metaphors and personification. They're going to be rich examples of how a writer has used a device to have a particular effect on a reader, to make you think or feel a particular thing, or to link to a particular idea. What other techniques have they used? Have they used, as I say, things like alliteration? Have they used onomatopoeia? What techniques have they used that you could pick out? And then what about sentence forms? My advice here would be to look for the shortest sentence and the longest one. So is there a really short sentence that maybe it could even be a minor sentence, one that shouldn't really be one? And look, why is that being used? Is it because it makes it sound like speech? Does it add to the tension? Why is there that really short sentence at that moment? And then find the longest sentence. Why? Are there lots of subordinate clauses here? Does it make it formal? Does it create a sense of pace if there are lots of commas? Try and find a reason for the different sentence forms. Look at different sentence types in terms of, are there directives, commands? Are there interrogatives, questions? What sentence types can you find? So there are those three things that you could look at for language there to make sure you've looked at not just language, but a range of different aspects of language. My final bit of advice here will be to avoid drifting into storytelling. And if you focus on the technique, the structural technique that the writer is using, and using terminology to label those techniques, that will help you to avoid that. If you're not careful, if you start saying, well, the writer uses tension here, and then he says this, and then that happens, and that's tense as well, and then that happens, and that's really tense. If you're not careful, it will just become very vague, and you'll just be telling me what happens. You'll just be recounting the content, the plot. Okay? You need to be focusing on the techniques, the devices, the things the writer has done to have an impact on you. And the more specific you can be about that, the higher your marks will be. Finally, question 5. What you want here is a series of clear comparisons. So a range of different aspects. One developed and supported comparison per paragraph, outlined clearly and then explained. Don't make the examiner search for the point of comparison. Make it easy for them. Right from the outset, say, in both texts, the writers do this. In this text, blah, blah, blah. In comparison, in this text, blah, blah, blah. Use comparative connectives like in contrast, whereas, similarly, in a similar way, on the other hand. Those connectives make it obvious that you're making a clear comparison. Do that in one paragraph, then move on to your next paragraph and do it again. Okay? And those clear comparative paragraphs will make it really easy for an examiner to think, yep, I can see the comparisons that they're making. If you can try and explore a different range of comparisons, that will be great. So some of them could be focused on themes or attitudes and views. Some of them could be more looking at tone and mood or the style of the writing, the use of language techniques. What about the openings? How are they similar or different? And the endings? What about the representation of characters or settings and how they might be important? The narrative perspective. Is it the first or the third person? Is the present or the past tense used? How are they positioning themselves as a narrator if it's in the first person? What's their focus? What's their emphasis on? And is that similar or different in both texts? Can you see, by looking at a range of different ways of comparing, what you're likely to do then is move beyond the superficial points. And the examiner's report says that in order to get the higher marks, it talks about assured responses that included astute analysis of language and structural features. The most successful also noted the difference in perspective and tone. Can you see that's going beyond just saying, well, these two texts are about explorers, these two texts are about dangerous situations. It's talking about tone, it's talking about language use, it's talking about how they're structured in similar or different ways. Okay? Timings. If all else fails, if you've got, maybe if you've only got, for some reason things have gone really badly, you've only got 2 minutes left, you've got to write something for each question, okay? If you write nothing, that's mad, okay? There's no point in saying, well, I really spent all my time on question 5 and then left question 4 blank. I know question 5 is worth more, okay? So it's worth 22 marks. You've got to give yourself enough time for it. But question 4 is also worth 12 marks. If you've only got 2 minutes, just get some things written down. Even if you just write 4 or 5 lines, you're going to get a few marks, okay? And it's always best to just divide up your time so at least you've tackled every question. Hopefully, by learning from doing a mock, you'll get the timing spot on by the time you do your actual thing. And then finally, try and take some pride in your spelling, punctuation and grammar. I know that for section A you're not actually marked on this, but the neater your handwriting is, just sensible, clear, neat spacing on lines, capitals for names, including your own name, okay, I, the pronoun I with a capital letter. Don't make really avoidable errors that will make your examiner scream. I know they shouldn't take marks off, but you really want to wind your examiner up, okay? You want to get them in a good mood, so try to focus on doing things that will get them in that mood.